To introduce our speakers and give us a bit more information on the webinar series, we are fortunate enough to have Katie Hinson, who is the Climate Adaptation Services Liaison at the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. But first, we are very fortunate to have Paul Wagner on with us today. He's going to give us a few opening remarks. And Paul is the USGS Deputy Associate Director for Ecosystems. So we're very fortunate to have him start us off. So welcome, Paul. I'd like to go ahead and welcome you to turn your camera on, come on screen, and take it away.
Okay, so camera should be on, and hopefully the microphone's on. Yes. And I did want to say that this is important enough that our Associate Director would normally be the person that gave some remarks. Ann Kinzinger could not be here today. She sends her regrets. It is important to her. But because she couldn't be here, she prepared some remarks that she wanted me to deliver to all of you. But it's really both of us that want to thank everyone for joining us today for the final session of this 5-part webinar series on Indigenous Knowledges, which is hosted by the USGS National Climate Adaptation Science Center in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Conservation Training Center, the USGS Office of Tribal Relations, and the Climate Adaptation Science Center's Tribal Climate Resilience Liaisons. We certainly hope this series has been informative to anyone interested in Indigenous knowledges. And through this series, we especially have sought to elevate federal employees' understandings of Indigenous knowledges in order to build better partnerships with Indigenous peoples. The series has tried to intentionally center on Indigenous perspectives and speakers. We thank the speakers today and in our prior sessions for sharing their time and expertise through this webinar series. It has been of tremendous value to our agency and partners, as demonstrated by the high attendance records. Each webinar has had 600 to more than 1,000 people. All of the webinars are being recorded and will be available to view and share from the USGS website so that this series will continue to serve as a resource. Looking ahead to next steps, the Department of the Interior and office representatives are working to develop a departmental handbook that will guide DOI employees in the implementation of the forthcoming departmental manual chapter on inclusion of Indigenous knowledge that was presented earlier in this webinar series. Those representatives and Indigenous scholars will be meeting at a workshop in early June to begin developing the handbook and identifying training needs. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that there is still much work to do to ensure Indigenous knowledges are included into the science planning and implementation processes, and that this is done in a meaningful and respectful way that facilitates trust with tribal and Indigenous partners. This webinar series and the next steps I just mentioned are part of that ongoing process. And so without further ado, I am happy to turn over speaker introductions to Kathy Hinson and thank all of you very, very much.
Hey, thank you so much. So I have the great honor of introducing our speakers for today. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Sara Kahanamoku, who is currently a postdoctoral fellow with the Hawaii Sea Grant Ulana Ike Center of Excellence, focusing on utilizing multiple knowledge systems to track historical climate and ecosystem cycles in Hawaii as part of the Rising Voices Changing Coasts National Indigenous and Earth Sciences Convergence Hub. RVCC, as it's also known, has an overarching goal of facilitating convergence research on coastal hazards in a community context through co-production between social and earth sciences and Indigenous knowledge experts. For their PhD research, Sara studied the life history and morphology of benthic foraminifera in the Santa Barbara Basin of California, using fossil records to track population level foraminifera or trends over the past 2,000 years and investigate the impact of climate change and eco-social regime shifts, such as impacts stemming from the colonization of California on foraminifera ecology. Sara has also conducted a meta-research on equity in the process of science, including on racial disparities in funding at the National Science Foundation and on place-based science in Hawaii. They previously served as a graduate fellow in the Hawaii Sea Grant Ulana Ike Center of Excellence from 2021 to 2023, while finishing their PhD at UC Berkeley. So really excited to hear from Sada today. We'll also be hearing from Michael Derglo Jr., who is the department head of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Tribal Historic Department, and has been a leader in climate change adaptation work for nearly a decade. He facilitated the development of a Flathead Reservation Climate Change Strategic Plan for CSKT, the third tribe to do so in the United States. After completing the plan, he continued to build on the work by diving deep into the perspectives of the elders and integrating traditional knowledge into the plan. Particularly unique has been Michael's all-inclusive and open approach towards climate planning. He has established monthly meetings of a climate change advisory committee and welcomes all stakeholders, both tribal and non-tribal. This has opened conversations among multiple jurisdictions, connecting people and adding value to solving the problems that will be faced by the impacts of climate change into the future. In 2016, Michael received the White House Champion of Change Award, and in 2017, Michael received the Climate Leadership Award for Natural Resources. Michael has also brought climate education and action to the youth of the CSKT by establishing the Environment Advocates for Global and Local Ecological Sustainability, otherwise known as the EAGLES. These youth are learning about taking responsibility for their environment and starting young to integrate environmental considerations into their lives. Michael served as in the Montana Army National Guard from 1981 to 1987 and is currently a member of the Mission Valley Honor Guard. So thank you so much to both of our speakers for joining us today. We also want to call attention to the beautiful artwork that has been showcased throughout this webinar series by Coral Avery. If you'd like to learn more about the symbolism and meaning behind this piece of art, there's full detail here on the slide as well as on the webinar webpage. And I think without further ado, I will pass it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. Hopefully you all can see my screen. Mahalo piho for that introduction, and aloha mai kako. It's so great to be here and be talking with you all about Indigenous knowledge and government. I'm so excited to hear from Uncle Mike as well. So today I'll be presenting on the Kulana Noi'i, which is a process-oriented resource that can help with establishing and sustaining equitable partnerships between researchers and communities. And I wanted to note that while the Kulana Noi'i reflects a uniquely Hawaiian perspective and is very much rooted in Hawaii, these guidelines address common challenges that are faced by research institutions and resource managers and community stewards more broadly. So we see this as an example best practice for folks who are interested in incorporating Indigenous knowledge in scientific research. So as we're situating ourselves, I want us to think about how place and people are central to research, right? And I think this is true for every type of research that we conduct, but it's particularly noticeable when we work with Indigenous communities, as many of us have strong connections to land as central tenets of our cultures or religions. In Hawaii, a major guiding principle for us is that of aloha aina, which describes the Hawaiian way of engaging with the land and all that surrounds or interacts with it. So land is the basis of our Indigenous knowledge system, and relationships among place and people help us to grow and apply that knowledge to contemporary issues. I'd also like to note that, I think we're all aware that federal guidance is now recognizing the centrality of place and relationship when we're doing research with Indigenous people, right? So the recent White House guidance on Indigenous knowledge tasks researchers with understanding the socio-political landscape of a research site and a research question. And it also tasks researchers with following ethical best practices that allow both tribes and Indigenous peoples and the scientific community to benefit from the research. And so in order to do this, to do research that is really beneficial to community, we need to take a place-based and a people-centric approach. And so the Kulana Noi'i is one way that we apply such a place-based approach in Hawaii. This is an Indigenous framework, and it has Kanako Iwi epistemological foundations, right? So it's really grounded in Hawaiian thinking, but it is also just broadly grounded in Indigenous studies and Indigenous worldviews, right? And so the meanings of Kulana include things like position or posture, or reputation, or attitude, or stance. And we pair it here with the word noi'i, which means to seek knowledge or to investigate, to research, or to search for even the smallest detail. So taken together, this term Kulana Noi'i is intended to describe how we carry ourselves in the process of conducting research. And so these are really just a set of standards for establishing collaborative, mutually beneficial community research partnerships as we do our science. And the Kulana Noi'i actually grew out of a site that has a lot of overlapping spheres of interest, right? This is a site where there's many different communities that have many different intersecting needs. And so you can see this place here on the screen. This is the Ahupua'a of He'eia. And you can see in the middle of the screen, if you're not familiar with it, there's this really large loko'ia or fish pond that reaches out into the ocean. And this place has a lot of converging interests, right? So it's a place of very active community that have a really strong presence of nonprofits and also Native Hawaiian stewards of place who are all working to restore Indigenous resource management practices. And these are some really highly innovative and organized efforts. If you're not familiar with it, I'd recommend checking out He'eia Fish Pond or Paipai o He'eia, who's one of the main stewards of this site. It's also a place where there's a lot of overlapping government and academic entities. So the University of Hawaii has a marine biology station nearby. There's also a National Estuarine Research Reserve in this area. The Resilient Lands and Waters Initiative is present, and there's a military base nearby. So this is a place where there's a huge confluence of academia and community and government, which means that there's many opportunities, but also many potential challenges, right? Like opportunities for miscommunication when all of these entities are interacting. And so we were actually approached by the stewards of He'eia Fish Pond who requested to develop a set of protocols to encourage more reciprocal research practices in this particular place. And so the Kulana Noi'i, which is our standards, are rooted in this collective knowledge and insight and effort that have been contributed over many years by communities and organizations in Hawaii. It actually draws heavily from a 2014 process, which was facilitated by Kua'aina Ulu'awamo, or KUA. And KUA is a local nonprofit that serves as a backbone organization for community-based resource management. KUA facilitated a committee whose work was incorporated throughout this document. And the Kulana Noi'i also includes concepts from small group discussions that happened in He'eia Fish Pond, in particular during the 2017 He'eia Science to Management Symposium, which included workshops with stewards and researchers. It also draws from a really broad body of academic research around co-production and community-based participatory research, and also research ethics in the context of Indigenous communities and spaces. We developed 8 Kulana, or standards, each of which has a set of best practices and also guiding questions. And we see these, this is a living document that's continuing to evolve and grow. And in particular, we use guiding questions because we want this to be process-oriented, right? This is about promoting a dialogue. We want these to be flexible enough for broad application across many different situations. We also see that the Kulana Noi'i are somewhat unique in that they consider both researcher and community perspectives and highlight the rights and responsibilities of both of these groups that are involved in developing and sustaining equitable and productive relationships. So instead of just focusing on one or the other, we're really trying to include feedback from both of these perspectives. And so in developing the Kulana Noi'i, we call it a guidance document. But our intention is not to provide a compliance standard or a checklist for achieving some sort of reciprocal community research partnership, right? It's not just something that you can do, check a box, and then assume that everything is all good. Instead, we see the Kulana Noi'i as a starting point for deeper conversation because it lays out a set of ideas and values and behaviors that when we apply it alongside hard work can help to build more just and generative relationships between researchers and communities. But it's meant to be adapted to the particular place and the context of a project. So we can't just take this and apply it one size fit all to everything. Okay, so let me just briefly go through what the Kulana actually are. So the first Kulana are foundational standards that talk about building and nurturing relationships, right? So this section is called Building and Nurturing Pilina. In Hawaiian, Pilina means respect or reciprocity, self-awareness and capacity. Oh, sorry, those are, I'm reading my notes wrong. Pilina means association, relationship, union, connection, and joining. Oh, this is why you got to pay attention. Okay, so the first Kulana is respect. So respect talks about how the history of the people and place are respected through understanding, acknowledging, and honoring local culture, traditions, knowledge, and wisdom. Right, and so this best practice is really talking about respect as the foundation of our pilina, our relationships that we build with one another. The second Kulana is reciprocity, and the best practice here is that the relationship between researchers and community should be reciprocal rather than extractive. The third Kulana is self-awareness and capacity. And so this is really just talking about, being aware of your intentions, your place, your power, and your value, both as an individual and as a representative of a group or an institution. And the final Kulana in this section is communication. And here the best practice is that we pursue inclusive and transparent and open communication throughout the research process. Okay, so those first 4 Kulana we're focusing on establishing relationships. But once those relationships are established, we need to also think about how we can keep them healthy. So the next 4 are under this header called A'o Aku, A'o Mai, Aloha Aku, Aloha Mai. And so this is really talking about learning given or learning received, right? And so the first Kulana in this next 4 is called maintaining a long-term focus. The best practice here is that all research projects should contribute positively to the effort to malama or care for each wahi or place. The next is community engagement and co-review. And so this really talks about promoting co-learning and co-development of methods and strategies and goals, and also project outcomes, right? And that these should all be adaptable to local place and to people, to the climate, to the resources that you have, and to the needs of your community. The third one is about knowledge stewardship. And so what this really talks about is how those data are being used and who is given control over the data, right? And so we view that as part of the responsibility that communities have to place and ancestors and descendants. They must have access to and ability to utilize data, and they also must have decision-making power in determining how these information and data are shared. And finally, and I think most importantly, the last Kulana in this is about accountability. And so the best practice here is talking about how when a project fails to meet the Kulana, the community and the researchers should work together to identify problems and adjust the project accordingly. And so the reason that we're really interested in the Kulana Noi'i is because we at Hawaii Sea Grant in particular see that we have a responsibility to ensure that the programs and the projects that we support are actually engaging in collaborative and mutually beneficial relationships with community, right? And that's because we recognize that community-based research can be really harmful when it's attempted without the right knowledge or the tools and the frameworks to actually make it reciprocal and beneficial, right? And this is especially true for communities like Native Hawaiians. We have been and we continue to be traumatized and harmed by research institutions, including the University of Hawaii. And so if we as an institution that works in Hawaii, that works closely with the university, as a part of the university, right? If we're encouraging and funding applied research and community-based research, it's our responsibility to address these past harms and to work on ensuring that we're not funding extractive practices. And so in the context of Sea Grant, we focus on supporting reciprocal work across a number of different areas, right? And so at Sea Grant, one of our roles is that we're a mediator. We often mediate when the relationship between researchers and community deteriorates. And this is where we can apply the Kulana around accountability to help repair that relationship and guide it back towards reciprocity. It's important to note that this can include, among many other things, communities saying no and ending the research relationship. And this is because ultimately one of our goals as a mediator, which is also echoed in recent White House guidance, is to support Indigenous and tribal sovereignty in generating mutually beneficial research. We also serve at Hawaii Sea Grant as a capacity and network builder, right? And so to date, we've actually trained over 700 researchers and community members and stewards in the best practices of the Kulana Noi'i across 35 different workshops. And this training has been institutionalized by Hawaii Sea Grant. It's mandatory for all PIs and for all of the students that we fund. But we also are frequently asked by other departments and entities, both within the state and outside of the state, to lead trainings. So it's expanding beyond Sea Grant in an informal capacity while being institutionalized within our own organization. We also serve as educators, right? We do a lot of different things, but one of our most recent efforts that we developed was a pilot program for an intensive 3-week-long graduate orientation course for incoming marine biology students at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And this course was actually structured around the Kulana Noi'i. It used this as an ethical framework to explore reciprocal place-based research methodologies. And so the course was really cool. It included service learning activities so that students could learn from place-based stewardship. And this was, across Ahupua'a or land tracts on the island of Oahu. In addition to service learning, it also included self-directed learning to broaden critical thinking and provide space for reflection, all towards the goal of making sure that students are integrating place-based dimensions in their graduate research. And the course actually culminated with students developing a set of their own individual place-based research ethics to inform their graduate work, which were modeled after the example of the Kulana Noi'i. And so we really see this as training the next generation of scientists to engage in reciprocal research practices from the very beginnings of their scientific careers. And this is one of our big goals, because as research coordinators, we're focused on building a community of researchers who are grounded in Kulana Noi'i and who use these values to better connect and communicate with the communities with whom they work. Right. And one of the most important benefits of this work, of training all these different researchers that come through to be aware of Indigenous practices, to develop reciprocal relationships in their research, is that we now have a large peer-to-peer support network of researchers who are doing community-based research. And so we see the Kulana Noi'i as a way to promote moving away from conventional research trajectories, which usually involve Indigenous communities as an afterthought, and instead move towards research that's grounded in community at every step of the process. And this is ultimately in service of Sea Grant's mission, but it goes beyond that to help promote more reciprocity between the university and the Indigenous communities, who are often providing expert knowledge or driving critical research innovations. And finally, one of our most important roles for encouraging accountability is a role as a funder, right? And we know that funding strategies are a key aspect of building institutional accountability, right? They can help to reduce the prevalence of extractive and exploitative practices, which have for a long time served to erode trust in Western science among Indigenous communities. If you're looking for more background on this issue in particular, on how funding strategies can be reframed to build reciprocity, I'd suggest checking out this article by Dr. Diamond Teixeira, which was published in EOS 2 years ago. And we also expanded on this writing in a recent Sea Grant webinar discussion, where we discussed strategies for more equitable research and funding practices and work that involves Indigenous people. There's a link to that webinar recording on this slide. And in Hawaii, we're increasingly seeing funders trying to include reciprocal research practices directly into requests for proposals. Hawaii Sea Grant is a really good example. We've actually included the Kulana Noi'i in our RFPs as a metric for assessing proposals that come in prior to them being funded. We're also seeing that funding agencies across the US are generating tools for implementing federal guidance on Indigenous knowledge, right? And this includes recent guidance that was released by the White House in December of 2022. And the goal of this is to help federal agencies incorporate Indigenous knowledge in all of their work. And I'd like to note that the Kulana Noi'i was actually cited in that guidance as an example of a promising practice for collaborating with Indigenous people. So that's really cool. We were pretty stoked about that. But of course, this guidance must be implemented not just at a national level, but also at state and local levels, right? And each agency has a unique context in which the work must be done. So we see funding as a key lever for ensuring that reciprocal research practices are actually institutionalized rather than just given lip service to. And so we wanted to highlight our role as funders in particular, because we think that this is key in ensuring accountability in our own local context. Right. And as funders, right, we have a significant influence on the research practices of funding recipients. And so this means that we can promote reciprocal research and avoid investment in extractive or exploitative research by making sure that the practices that we are incentivizing are following these best practices for engaging with Indigenous peoples. And so Kulana Noi'i is just one example of a strategy for encouraging reciprocal research with Indigenous people. But all of this is in service of a broader vision. Right. Ultimately, we're hoping to build structures where funders across the United States are supporting place-based and Indigenous-led research. And so I know that was really quick. If you have any questions about the Kulana Noi'i, please feel free to reach out to me or other members of the Ulana Ike Center of Excellence via email after this webinar. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. And mahalo so much for all of your folks' time.
So do I jump right in or what, Sarah?
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
we're
sorry,
ready for you.
Thanks,
I don't know about that. You go by Sarah or Sarah?
I go by Sada. Yeah,
Sarah.
I'm named after my Tahitian grandma.
Oh,
So
nice.
the French,
Yeah. I want to keep listening to you. I had the opportunity to go to Hawaii a few years ago, and that garden that all those people were walking around with their shoes off. I got to go to that garden, and that was pretty awesome. Yeah,
That's so great.
had a meeting with some of the folks from University of Hawaii, Kapu'alani Community College, Bob Franco and Ula. I don't know if you know them. Ula Hassinger is from University of Hawaii. But anyway, thank you so much. That's awesome. Kisu Quicknam Oxmaknik Kotlis Kawiska Klautla. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Standing Grizzly Bear. My Suyapi name or my English name is Mike Dergalo. And before I forget, I want to invite all of you, and I know there was over 700 participants, but I will be traveling to Shepherdstown, West Virginia on Monday to work with a group of superstars, Dan Wildcat and a few others, Anne Marie and some other folks on those guidances and that handbook. So I would like to invite you guys, all of you, to email me any concerns, comments, anything as far as I know that Sarah, you had mentioned a few things about, what do we want to actually, what's the message we want to give them besides, reciprocity and part of that is take only what you need, honorable extraction, that type of thing. So I want to invite all of you to, and I know that's I'll probably be bombarded with emails, but and that's fine because we'll be there for a week in Shepherdstown at the National Conservation Training Center, working really for all of you, all of us, all Indigenous people, and making sure our voices are being heard. So thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I have to go back because earlier I went through my, okay. So what I'm talking about today is best practices for engaging tribal nations and Indigenous people surrounding Indigenous knowledges. So over the years, what was her name? Katie shared with you guys earlier that I've been doing this for quite a long time, over a decade, actually. I don't remember when that bio was done a few years ago, but I've actually been working for the tribe. It'll be 40 years in August. I know I don't look that old, but yeah, been quite a while. And the last probably at least 12 to 15 years, I've been doing a lot of work around climate change and also working with different organizations such as the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and all these other agencies. And really it's all about building trust and communication. I think it's gotten a lot better as far as consultation. I know you're all familiar with the memo that came down from the Biden administration instructing agencies to do a better job of consultation. But I can remember back in the day when all the agency had to do was call the tribe, and they could talk to about anybody who picked up the phone and mark it down on in their little checkbox that they consulted with the tribe. I think it's come a long way. I think we have a long way to go. And I think it takes people like all of you working together and all of the different agencies and understanding and respect to do that. So what I would like to share, I live actually on the Flathead Reservation in Northwest Montana. The Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes are a confederacy. The confederacy is actually the two Salish tribes. There's 3 tribes that were placed here on the reservation back in 1855 when we signed the Hellgate Treaty. Those tribes are the Kalispet, of which I am a member of, the Bitterroot Salish, and the Kootenays. So the Kalispet were actually here, our home base. You see that picture down there on the left? That's our annual river honoring where we bring in about 300 to 500 kids from local schools to spend time along the river and learn about what we do as a tribe. But right across from that spot is where my family had their original allotment. My great grandparents owned, well, they didn't own, but they ran horses on the other side of the river, right across from there. The tribal government actually employs about 1,200, probably a little bit more than that, between 12 and 1,300 tribal and non-tribal staff members. The reservation is 1.3 million acres, close to 8,000 members. We are located, if you look at right here, this is the reservation, this is Blackfeet. We're about 3.5 hours from Canada and about 3 hours from Idaho. So right up in northwest part of Montana, right smack dab in the middle of God's country. This is actually part of my house. If you can see my little pointer, my little arrow thing is about right there. This is the national or the bison range that we recently acquired. So the native, one of the really awesome partnerships that we've established over the years is with the Wilderness Society. This is one of the examples that I wanted to share. Ann Carlson from the Wilderness Society and I were supposed to give a presentation to the National Wilderness workshop in Missoula about a couple months ago, and I had to have shoulder surgery like the day before we were supposed to present, so I couldn't do it. But this is part of the presentation that her and I were going to do. We've been working together and built a great relationship, working relationship with her organization for over a decade, and that relationship is what the example that I wanted to share as far as, you know, building trust, not the kind of the one and done thing. You come in, you do a project and you leave, and we never see the data and about, you know, all that stuff. So building that relationship is really what I jokingly but not jokingly say is that it's a lifelong commitment that we make. I mean, if you want to work with us, then work with us. Like Katie stated earlier, we were one of the first tribes in the United States to develop a climate strategy. I started that process in 2012, finished in 2012, finished in 2013. And like Sarah said, you know, I wanted to make sure that my tribal council, which my brother at the time just happened to be the chairman, my tribal council knew that this is a living document, and it's not something that I want to do, put together and, you know, live on somebody's shelf and collect dust over the years. So we've really been working on this, updating it every few years, and making sure that it is, and as all of you know, climate change is always, I mean, there's something changing. The reason we recently was basically rewriting our plan was because the data and the models that we were looking at back in 2011, 2012 were so outdated. And you all know that, you know, what we were looking at as far as projections, we've already gone way past what like what we were not supposed to see until like 2050 or 2060. So those things are happening now. So we're having, and a lot of that is reactive to some real severe and the weather patterns and all that stuff. So I can't remember the right word. So our plan basically is pretty comprehensive in that it includes 9 sectors that I put in here. Those are all the different sectors that are within the plan, and we've been working on those sectors. This is our new plan. It's not quite ready, but you can see what we've done on our website, where you can look at it. It's csktclimate.org, and it has my contact information, and it has our new plan. And part of that new plan is incorporating quite a lot more traditional knowledge. And I don't know, I can't see all of you, but I'm just now in the process of actually listening to an audio book by Jessica Hernandez called Fresh Banana Leaves. And, it's really talking about how we are connected to the land, to the earth, to Mother Earth. And this actually comes from an awake vision that I had. One morning I woke up early, like 3 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't go back to sleep. And this just represents the grounding in the traditions and the connection, the interconnection of all things. So all of these different pictures represent part of the one sector in the plan. So fish, water, people, land, forestry, wildlife, all those things represent that connection. And those are the things that I feel like, we as Indigenous people need to kind of put forth out there that the biggest thing about how are we gonna change the world and make a difference about climate change is reconnect ourselves to the sacred circle of life. We're not above it, we're not below it, we're part of it. White bark pine was something that is basically really a success story for us. We've done a lot of work around white bark pine. If you're not familiar with it, it is a high elevation, slow growing tree species that really provides food and habitat for over 100 animals, including us. It was one of our traditional foods. There's a short video called 7 Generations that I could put a link in later, but I could share that. Talks about more about white bark pine. And over the last 5 years, I think the forestry department has planted probably about 9,000 trees up in the high elevations of our forests. So those are really going to help snowpack retention and for food source. This tree here is an old white bark pine, and I named that tree my Adlauya. Adlauya in my language means my great grandparent. This is a representation of the crown of the continent, which I'm a part of, the Crown Managers Partnership. We work cross boundary, as you know, species and different animals and water and everything doesn't recognize lines or boundaries. So we try to do a lot of work cross boundary with the Canadian, British Columbia and other, the tribes and the resource folks across the line. And one of the things that I think is very, very, very important in all of this work is leadership support. Really hard to do anything without that support. This is representatives of our tribal council, and we think it was Anne notified me about a concern that you guys probably heard about Bears Ears National, the sort of national park, or anyway. So I brought that to the tribal council. They wrote a letter in support of Bears Ears, and we sent that. And if you know where Bears Ears are, it's down in New Mexico, which is not part of our Aboriginal homelands. But I felt like, we need to support each other. We need to help each other out whenever we can. So really, I brought that to council for their support, and they did it. They wrote the letter in support of Bears Ears, and hopefully that did some good. Big John Tester, one of our representatives, he's a senator, really making those, building those relationships with those folks too. This is my brother and his son, my nephew. We actually got to go have a beer with Big John there at the amphitheater, and that's really what it's about, building those relationships. So here's a whole bunch of different examples of projects that we've been working on and the partners that helped us. Earlier, Katie mentioned the Eagles program that I put together. That's a youth program that we put out in all the schools on the reservation, and I'm hoping to expand that. The Northwest Tribal Climate Summit, Earth Day celebrations. And you can look at these. These links will all be available after I'm done. So here's some thoughts about the breast. Show up, listen deeply, volunteer when you hear others, identify specific tasks, next steps that are needed. Whenever someone asks you to do something, say yes. Share opportunities, news, and information. Avoid making any requests of your own. And own your mistakes. So that is, and I think we have a few minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much to both of our presenters. And yes, we do have a couple of questions that we wanted to share with you if you still have a moment. We'll start off with Sarah. There was a question of, I received this feedback today from Millie Jimenez, staff assistant to the MPS director, wondering what other things about the term partner, wondering what others think about the term partnerships when collaborating with tribes. When talking about tribes and the park, please refrain from saying partnerships with tribes and instead say our relationship with tribes. Tribes are sovereign nations, and we should refer to them as such and build relationships with them as such. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've realized in that, as I've been learning about other Indigenous communities, is we have a very different context in Hawaii because we're not federally recognized. And so oftentimes the language that we use sounds different than the language that's used on the continent, particularly when engaging with tribes that have that nation-to-nation relationship and have signed treaties with the US. So yeah, that's kind of my thinking. I think we use partnership because that's oftentimes the context of the Hawaiian communities that we work with like to have that be placed into. But maybe Uncle Mike has more thoughts on how to engage with that from a continental perspective.
So what was the actual question, Elder?
Yes, of course. Just about the comment when talking about tribes and the park, to please refrain from saying partnerships with tribes and instead say our relationship with tribes. Since tribes are sovereign nations, they should be referred to as such and build relationships with them as such.
Okay, well, I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I have, and in fact, I just finished a pilot project up in Glacier National Park. So we're talking about national parks, correct? Yeah, we just finished a pilot project up there. We're working on, the pilot project was looking at climate impacts to cultural sites and resources and looking at what, identifying the impacts to those sites and then bringing that information. So you use Western science to identify what those impacts are, and then you use traditional knowledge because we brought to the elders what we found, the impacts to those sites, such as a historic campsite that was being eroded into by the river. So we brought a few alternatives to the elders and asked them, what do you want us to do? So we gave them some choices. And they could say, we don't want you to do anything. Stay the hell away from there or whatever, they could say, just leave it be and let it do what it, but really, again, it goes back to having trust and building those relationships over years. We just started another project around RAD. I don't know if you guys are familiar with RAD. The RAD concept is resist, accept, direct. So it's really bringing the tribes to the table from the very beginning, not coming up with a plan to replace St. Mary's Bridge and then say, oh, tribes, we're going to replace St. Mary's Bridge. Here's our plan. What do you think? We're at the table from the very beginning, from the process, you know, helping with the process. So that's part of it.
Thank you, and I apologize. I always forget to introduce myself. I'm Elda Verlamander with the USGS, and I was part of the webinar planning committee. And moving on back to the questions. This one's for Sarah that says, thank you for sharing this information. What are some examples of research that would versus would not be considered exploitative or extractive by Indigenous communities?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I'm going to actually share, because I think that other people have talked about this in a way that is a bit more eloquent than I can, right? So I'm actually sharing a plot from, or I guess a figure from a paper that was led by Dominique David Chavez. She's Taino researcher who thinks a lot about engaging with Indigenous communities, in particular in climate science. And so I think that when we're trying to ask what it means for something to be exploitative or extractive, it's obviously going to be like based in a community context. Like the community decides what is actually exploitative, right? And so I would say the best thing to do there would just be to go and talk to the community first and start to get an idea of what some of the values are that the community has, you know, what some of the actions that they want to see are, right? But I think in general, this is a really useful way to like ground your thinking about just like, you know, any given project that works with Indigenous people, right? So we really don't want to see projects that are like contractual, where community members are just brought in on a part-time basis to perform tasks, but researchers make all the decisions, right? And Uncle Mike talked about that too. Yeah, we want to have tribes at the table from the beginning. Ideally, we want to have tribes like leading every aspect of a research project, deciding what research is actually useful. That's something that, you know, is more towards that collegial or Indigenous side of this scale, right? So, and in an ideal world, we want our projects to be centered in Indigenous value systems, right? Aware of historical context, and where community members have full authority over all aspects of the research process, including, you know, the initial conception of the research and the outputs. So yeah, I guess I would just say like it kind of comes down to your ability to get familiar with what it means to do Indigenous centered work. So I can't really give you any solid examples, but I would suggest checking out that paper as a starting point. It builds off of the ladder of citizen participation, which is a paper from like 1960. And then also just talk to people, see what they think is extractive. So yeah, Uncle Mike, do you have any thoughts?
I don't have you read that book, Fresh Banana Leaves, Sarah?
Not yet, but it's on my list. I've been meaning to.
She talks about it. I mean, you know, really you have to go into the community and get, you know, you can't, for us, it's like, you can't just you can't go through Salish Kootenai College. We actually established our own RRB, Reservation Review Board. The college has an IRB, but for the non-human subject project proposals, you have to go to the RRB, and that RRB is made up of myself and probably 10 other people, elders included. But part of the process that the researchers have to go through is to go to our elders councils. So we have two of them, Salish and Kootenai. Included with the Salish, of course, is the Kalispel of the Pend Oreille. So the people that are requesting to do a project, any project, it could be huckleberry phenology, it could be a number of things, climate impacts on our spiritual health, that type of thing. They have to go through those committees before they even actually go to the next level, which is the IRB. So, I mean, in being able to protect that information, the sensitive stuff, and not have it exploited is so important.
Yeah, that's actually why we've been working a lot on like knowledge stewardship at the University of Hawaii in particular, because we don't have like a tribal IRB or an RRB yet. And so we've been trying to figure out ways to work within the system that we currently have to be like, okay, how do we make sure that the Indigenous knowledge is protected, and that when Native communities are engaging with us, that they know that their, you know, their information, their data, which is their ancestors, really, like all data is grounded in ancestral knowledge and relationships, So, their data ancestors are not going to be just taken and become the property of the university. And that's something I think that it's a growing field. Dominique, who's the author that made that figure that I showed, is working on pretty intensively is Indigenous data sovereignty. So for folks who are not familiar with that term, definitely recommend checking that out.
Thank you. And a question that I'll start off with for Mike that asks, how often do you suggest a climate plan should be revised to stay up to date?
I think we did it like every 5 years, at least. I mean, it's something that Sarah mentioned earlier too, and I mentioned it too, that it's a living document. I mean, you could, and each sector, I mean, you could look at each sector individually, and we could have a catastrophic wildfire, I mean, which we have experienced, and it changes the whole course of action, right? In 1 year. And that's one of the things I witnessed up in Alaska when I worked with the Alaska tribes, is that they're really struggling to even come up with a climate adaptation plan because they're in reaction mode. Their villages fallen into the river or the ocean, and it's like, we don't have time to sit down and develop a plan. We have to react. We have to move our whole village from along the shoreline up to higher ground. So yeah, as often as you need to.
Well, as we approach the hour, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, but thank you so much for joining and sharing this knowledge with us today. Thank you to those who were able to join to listen and be part of this conversation. And we thank everyone for following our series. This is the final one in our 5-part series, but as mentioned earlier, we will be posting these recordings on our website and sending out that information to all those who registered for the webinar series. So more information to come, and thank you again to everyone.
Thank you.